Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is November 1st, a new month. As the garden settles into its autumn rhythm, let's begin with Louisa King's diary entry from, I'm guessing, 1926, because this book was published the following year in 1927. Louisa writes about the ritual of storing garden tools, a task that marks the official transition from active gardening to winter preparation. Here's Louisa's entry for November 1st. In putting away tools for winter, they must first be thoroughly cleaned with waste or cloths. All rust must be taken off. And is there anything better than old kerosene for this? The identification of one's own tools by means of a painted band of bright color, green, blue, or red, on the handles of each is an excellent plan. The same way traveling trunks are marked for quick finding on foreign trips. This careful attention to our garden tools reflects a deeper truth about gardening, that every ending is also a preparation for a new beginning. Speaking of November's gifts, an article from 1904 reminds us that even as other flowers fade, the chrysanthemum stands as autumn's last colorful sentinel. Here's a little article that was in the Pittsburgh Press in late October in 1904, and the title of this snippet is November Garden Flowers. The problem of November flowers is simple enough. Nothing but chrysanthemums can be relied on after the first killing frost has devastated the garden. That is why chrysanthemums should be placed near the house, where the cheer of them may be appreciated afar off by the returning breadwinner. Their glory sometimes lasts until Thanksgiving, but the colors fight like cats and dogs unless one separates the crimson from the purple. Choose the old-fashioned buttons or the artemisias for mass effects, or the varieties with flowers about an inch across. A little reflection on chrysanthemums from 120 years ago. Let's turn to Carol Chapek's The Garden Year, where he shares a profound meditation on November's garden tasks and the eternal cycle of nature. He writes, "Yet a little while, and we shall do our garden the last service. We will still allow 1 or 2 early frosts to come, and then we shall bed it in green brushwood. We shall bend the roses and scrape soil up to their necks. We shall spread resinous spruce branches over the beds, and then good night." Usually one covers up something else with this brushwood, a pocket knife, or a pipe. In spring, when we take the brushwood away, we shall meet with everything again. But we are going too quickly. We have not stopped flowering yet. Still, the Michaelmas daisy blinks with its lilac eyes. The primroses and the violets flower as a sign that even November is spring. The chrysanthemum does not let any atmospheric or political conditions prevent it from producing all its fragile and immense profusion of flowers, of fox reddish and glistening white, golden and garnet flowers. Still the rose bears its last blooms. Queen of plants, You have been flowering for 6 months. It is your royal duty. And then the leaves are flowering, the autumn leaves, yellow, purple, flaming red, orange, paprika scarlet, blood red and red, orange, black, and dusty blooming berries, and yellowish, reddish, and blonde wood of the naked branches. And still we have not finished. Even when they will be buried in snow, there will be the dark green holly with glowing red berries, and black pines, and little cypresses and yews. There is never an end. I tell you, there is no death, not even sleep. We only pass from one season to another. We must be patient with life, for it is eternal. As your garden prepares for winter, I invite you to pause and observe these transitions. What final blooms are brightening your garden? How are you preparing your tools and spaces for their winter rest? Let these November tasks become a meditation on the garden cycle, remembering that, as Chopik so beautifully notes, the earth never truly dies. It simply dreams of spring. It's time for today's botanical history. It was on this day, November 1st, in 1636, that Nicolas Boileau-Despréaux was born on this day in Paris. Boileau was a French poet and critic whose garden became a sanctuary for some of the greatest literary minds of the 17th century. Though Boileau began his life in the cramped urban setting of the Rue de Jerusalem near the Sainte-Chapelle, his lasting legacy would include a garden that became the heart of French literary culture. In 1685, after achieving both wealth and fame through his poetry and criticism, Boileau purchased a country house in Auteuil for 8,000 livres. This property, which would become known as the Auteuil Inn, was where the true magic happened. Here, surrounded by carefully tended gardens, Boileau hosted some of the most influential minds of his time, including Molière, Racine, and later even Joseph Addison. The garden at Auteuil inspired Boileau's 11th epistle, where he converses with his gardener about how industry and virtue are the truest sources of happiness. In this work, we see the intersection of Boileau's two great passions, precise literary expression and the tranquil beauty of a well-tended garden. Louis Racine, in his memoirs, paints a vivid picture of these garden gatherings. He writes, "What made people seek Boileau's meals was less the food than the conversations." These garden-side discussions shaped French literary taste for generations to come, as Boileau and his circle established new standards for clarity and precision in writing. Interestingly, while Boileau was known for his sharp literary criticism, his garden revealed a gentler side of his nature. His friend Madame Sévigné once remarked that he was only cruel in verse. In person, and especially in his beloved garden, he was known for his warmth and hospitality. Today, Boileau's original property has been subdivided. His legacy lives on in the Hameau Boileau, meaning Boileau Hamlet, a quiet, leafy corner of Paris's 16th arrondissement. Modern visitors can still stroll under massive chestnut trees, where over 3 centuries ago, one of France's greatest critics found peace among his plants and poetry. As gardeners, we can appreciate Boileau's understanding that a garden could be both a retreat from the world and a gathering place for minds to flourish. His garden at a toy reminds us that sometimes the most important cultivation we do in the garden is not just of plants, but of ideas and friendships as well. It was on this day, November 1st in 1857, that John Joly was born in Hollywood House near the village of Bracknell in Ireland. Joly was an Irish polymath whose profound connection to nature led him not only to groundbreaking scientific discoveries, but also to poetry about fossils and gardens. As the son of an Anglican rector, John grew up with a deep appreciation for both the scientific and poetic aspects of nature. While Joly would become known for his numerous scientific achievements, including the invention of color photography and groundbreaking work in radiotherapy, it's his connection to the natural world that particularly interests us as gardeners. Along with his lifelong friend Henry Dixon, who would become a professor of botany, Joly solved one of gardening's greatest mysteries: how sap rises in plants. Before Joly and Dixon's breakthrough, no one could explain how water could defy gravity to reach the tops of tall trees. Their cohesion-tension theory revealed that it was the simple process of evaporation from leaves that created the pressure differential needed to pull water upward through plants. This fundamental understanding transformed our knowledge of plant physiology and still informs how we care for our gardens today. But perhaps what makes Joly most fascinating to us as gardeners was his ability to see the poetic in the scientific. He was known to compose verses while on his frequent hiking expeditions through the Wicklow and Dublin hills. In one particularly moving sonnet about a fossil called Oldhamia antiqua, Joly reflected on the vast span of geological time and nature's endless cycles of change. He wrote, "Is nothing left? Have all passed passed thee by? The stars are not thy stars. The aged hills are changed and bowed beneath repeated ills of ice and snow, of river and of sky. The sea that raiseth now an agony is not thy sea. The stormy voice that fills this gloom with man's remotest sorrow shrills the memory of the futurity. We, promise of the ages, lift thine eyes, and gazing on these tendrils intertwined for eons in the shadows, recognize in hope and joy, in heaven-seeking mind, in faith, in love, in reason's potent spell, the visitants that bid a world farewell." When Joly wasn't revolutionizing science or composing poetry, he was an avid sailor and an outdoorsman who believed that the best thinking happened in nature. Joly would often risk life and limb to collect geological samples, once convincing a fisherman to row him through dense fog to a remote rock formation just to gather specimens. Today, while we might best remember Joly for his scientific achievements, including a crater on Mars named in his honor, we gardeners can appreciate him as someone who understood that nature's mysteries could be approached through both scientific inquiry and poetic contemplation. As you tend your garden today, remember John Joly, who showed us that sometimes the most profound scientific discoveries come from simply paying careful attention to the natural world around us. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Adventures in Eden by Carolyn Mullet. This book came out in December 2020, and the subtitle is An Intimate Tour of the Private Gardens of Europe. Well, I have waited all week to share this book with you, and this book truly does belong in everyone's garden library. I wanted today to share two fascinating gardens from this magnificent tour of Europe's private gardens. And I also had a painful decision to make which two was I going to share with you. And so the first one I chose is the garden at Broughton Range. It's in Oxfordshire. And the reason I picked this garden is this is the garden that is on the cover of the book. So if you're looking at the cover and you're seeing those boxwood in that very unique shape, and then the tulips because it was spring in between the boxwood in those little beds, well, that is Broughton Grange in Oxfordshire. This garden was designed by Tom Stuart Smith, who in this garden is boldly challenging traditional English garden conventions. So instead of just a typical hedged garden room, it offers a sweeping panorama that Tom describes as one overall story with a series of subplots. Now, what's particularly fascinating about this garden is its stunning parterre design. It's not just beautiful, it's actually based on a microscopic cellular examination of leaves from the surrounding hedgerows. So normally, you're planting your boxwood and you pick a shape, whether it's lines or circles or what have you, and you just plant them, and then that's defining your garden beds. Well, in this case, what Tom did is he looked literally at a microscopic zoom in of the veins of some of the hedgerow leaves on this property, and he used that veination to create the lines of where he was going to plant the boxwood. And the effect is absolutely stunning, and that's why it's on the cover of the book. It's a brilliant example of how nature's smallest details can inspire grand garden design. Now, what I thought I'd do today is just share what Carolyn wrote about this garden, because she does a great job of not only showing us the gardens, the photography is incredible, but she also does a great job of explaining what we're seeing and the genesis stories behind these fantastic images. So here's what she writes about Broughton Grange. In the rolling countryside of Oxfordshire in southeast England is a new walled garden that boldly defines the idea that has dominated English gardens for the last 100 years, the hedged garden room. Designed by Tom Stuart Smith, the 1.5-acre garden at Broughton Grange has a singular sweeping panorama with a few structural elements to interrupt the view. Tom says, I like everything to be interconnected, one overall story with a series of subplots, not a series of episodes. I want the whole garden to be one malleable entity. The gardens at Broughton Range dated from the Victorian era until the current owner, Stephen Hester, asked Tom in 2000 to design a contemporary garden. Stephen was inspired by the open parterres of the gardens at Chateau de Villandry and a novel that he read as a child, The Secret Garden, written in 1911 by Frances Hodgson Burnett. In a break with convention, the two chose a site that was not connected to the house. In a sloping paddock some distance away, Tom created a destination garden enclosed on the west and north sides by handsome brick walls. The space opens to the sunnier sides, with views of the surrounding bucolic valley. Within the walls, Tom divided the garden into 3 spacious terraces, each with its own atmosphere and planting style. On the lowest level is the parterre of those velvety rounded boxwood in what appears to be an abstract pattern. It is, however, based on an enlargement of the microscopic cellular structure of leaves outside the garden. Seasonal plantings fill the spaces between the parterre venation, with a particularly effective display of jewel-tone tulips in the spring. And as I mentioned, that is the image that makes the cover of this book. From the parterre terrace, one ascends perfectly proportioned steps to the middle level. And at the center of this level is a rectangular pond with thick stepping stones that float just above the waterline. On this terrace, one can pause at a stone sitting area. There are masses of Regersea, Persicaria polymorphia, and the beautiful grass Calamagrostis overdam that spill onto the single path, while shaped beach stand like pawns on a chessboard. And then a final set of steps leads down to the deep upper terrace that's covered in a veritable sea of lemon, lavender, rose, and pearl-colored plants. On this level, Tom created a ravishing plant tapestry that's punctuated with thin, dark yew columns. This is one of my favorite parts of the garden. It seems impenetrable, but on closer inspection, one discovers narrow, one-person paths. And then eventually, on this level, there is a rill, or a stream, that flows into the pond below. It's a place of calm in an otherwise intense and near-wild space. Now, although the rill, as the garden's water source, seems like the heart of the garden, Stephen notes that for him, in a counterintuitive way, the heart is actually the surrounding beautiful English valley. The garden feels at one with the countryside, and yet it is set apart. With the walled garden, Tom Stuart Smith brought 21st century design to Broughton Grange. Well, our second garden stop is no less remarkable, and it is Brian's Ground in Stapleton, Herefordshire, where owners David Wheeler and Simon Durrell have created what I like to think of as organized wilderness. Their design philosophy embraces what Vita Sackville West advocated, the strictest formality of design with the maximum informality in planting. Here's what Carolyn Mullett wrote about this garden. She gives us a wonderful description that captures the spirit of this very unique place. The owners made their initial decisions about the garden soon after they moved in November of 1993, when they confidently drew outlines of a design in newly fallen snow. The property included a handsome 1913 house. It was built in the local half-timbered style, typical of the influential arts and crafts movement, in which hand craftsmanship was preferred over mass production, and gardens harmonized with their houses and the surrounding countryside. These ideas have held sway over David and Simon as well. The couple's first venture in making the garden was in an area next to the driveway entrance. Seeing some depressions in the soil, they deduced that at one time this had been an orchard, and they immediately decided to plant 30 heritage apple trees of different varieties arranged in a grid. Each tree was placed in the middle of a 10-foot square. underplanted with Iris siberica papillon, which flowers in soft lavender blue from May to early June. In February, when the points of the iris leaves are just about to peep from the soil, they are covered in a blue haze of anemone blonda. David and Simon blithely refer to this successful succession as high tide and low tide. I love that. Well, a decade later, they added a shallow canal through the orchard, its brick edges emphasizing the view of the house from the driveway, augmenting the visitor's arrival experience with a year-round feature. If it seems that the pair is particularly at ease with garden design, one can look to their professional lives for the explanation. David is the publisher and editor of the literary gardening quarterly Hortus, which Gardenista calls the New Yorker of horticultural reading. And Simon is its art editor, who also paints landscapes and designs gardens. As you can tell, Carolyn's garden descriptions are loaded with fantastic information about the creation of these earthly Edens, making it possible for us to follow in their footsteps. To me, that's what makes this book particularly valuable for gardeners. We have so much to learn from each garden profile. Carolyn showcases the incredible diversity of European garden design while offering valuable insider insights into how these spaces were conceived and created. And that's simply incredible, because then you can reverse engineer some of this and draw inspiration for your own space. Whether you're working with a small urban plot or a sprawling country garden, there are lessons and inspiration to be found in each of these 50 gardens. And the photos of these magnificent Edens are enough to make any gardener's heart skip a beat. This book is 364 pages of masterful garden design and intimate portraits of garden creators, providing inspiration that will have you dreaming of both distant gardens and new possibilities for your own space. You can get a copy of Adventures in Eden by Carolyn Mullet and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $30. All right, we end the show today by celebrating the birth of Texas's first botanical textbook author and a remarkable woman who moved seamlessly between poetry, botany, and battlefield inspiration. Matilda Jane Fuller Young, who went by Maud Jeannie, was born on this day, November 1st in 1826 in Beaufort, North Carolina. Though largely self-taught, she learned Latin, Greek, German, and French, skills that would later prove invaluable in her botanical work. In 1873, while serving as Texas state botanist, Maud published Familiar Lessons in Botany with a Flora of Texas. It was the first botanical textbook written specifically for Texas students. In the book's introduction, Maud wrote with characteristic warmth and accessibility, "I have given you a glimpse into the world whose wonders, beauties, and uses I wish you to investigate. I shall endeavor to divest your study of all difficulties, avoiding learned technicalities as much as possible." So she was really trying to keep things simple for the students that were going to read this book. Beyond the classroom, Maud was also a passionate conservationist. Her 1880 article on forest culture advocated for research, tree planting, forest clubs, and protective legislation, revolutionary ideas for her era. She understood that botanical knowledge wasn't just academic. It was essential for preserving the natural world. Sadly, nature itself would claim much of Maud's legacy when the Great Galveston Hurricane of 1900 destroyed her herbarium of Texas ferns and flowering plants, along with many of her writings. Maud Jeannie Young's story teaches us something vital about gardening. That knowledge of plants isn't just about classification and terminology. It's about making the wonders of the natural world accessible to everyone. As we wrap up today's show, I'm struck by how our stories weave together to remind us of the enduring power of gardens to inspire, educate, and transform. We began with Nicolas Boileau-Despréaux, whose garden at Antoi became a sanctuary where some of France's greatest minds gathered to share ideas. Then we celebrated John Joly, whose brilliant scientific mind solved one of gardening's greatest mysteries, how sap rises in plants. This theme of gardens as both personal sanctuaries and spaces for sharing knowledge carried through to our book review of Adventures in Eden by Carol Mullett. And then our Botanic Spark shows us how one person's passion for plants can educate and inspire generations. Together, these stories remind us that whether we're creating a formal French garden, solving botanical mysteries, designing contemporary European spaces, or simply teaching others about the plants in our own backyard, gardens have the power to bring people together and create lasting legacies. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.